Good evening and welcome to another edition of Conservative Corner. My name is Tom Mountain. I am the Republican State Committee man for this district, which includes Newton. I am also the former head of the Newton Republican City Committee. And this program is devoted to tackling and discussing issues which may not be covered by the local and state media, given the political demographics of our state, and specifically our city, which tends to be very democratic and very liberal. Nevertheless, there is and always has been a vibrant Republican community within Newton, and there always will be in the foreseeable future, for which we're grateful. So we don't necessarily speak to specifically towards the Republican minority. We'd rather speak to the community and with the community as a whole to present perspectives and present ideas and issues that may not be discussed in the general, shall we say, mostly liberal media. Tonight we'll be discussing the results of the election, both state and national. And we're very glad to have with us here tonight a very successful long-term businessman in Newton and the co-chair of or rather the chair of the Ward 1 Republican City Committee, who has been a Republican for many years and more specifically a Republican activist in Newton for a very long time, and that of course is Mark Sestari. Mark, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Great to see you, Tom.
We're very glad to have you with us tonight. In the Republican world, there was much hoopla pertaining to the national election as to a so-called red wave, which was supposed to sweep throughout the country, and while it wouldn't necessarily sweep through New England, we Republicans were confident that it would take the country by storm. Well, obviously it didn't. There was no significant red wave to speak of. However, the Republicans did gain the House, did regain control of the House of Representatives. The tallies are still out in that we don't know to what extent or how many seats the Republicans will be in the majority. But however, as is done with the Super Bowl, what matters is that you win by 1 point or you lose by 1 point, regardless of how differentiated the spread is, the score is, so to speak. Now, in the Senate, we Republicans were very disappointed that we did not win the Senate. We didn't see this coming. We thought that we would win anywhere from 2 to 6 seats. Not easily, but that was a given. However, as tends to happen in these things, when you really hype how well you're going to do in a game or in an election, things don't always work out. The more the hype, the higher the expectations, and the more the disappointment when they don't work out. And of course, it didn't work out. But nevertheless, Republicans have gained control of the House, which is very important in that the House will, of course, decides who gets paid what in terms of the various agencies, the various departments of the federal government. The House controls the money. The House will control the flow of legislation to the president, and above all, the House will also determine which hearings are held on what topics and how these hearings are going to be determined. But nevertheless, Mark, it was still a disappointment, and I, for one, was as guilty as anyone in predicting that we would, while not necessarily have a red tsunami, that we would have a significant majority in both chambers of Congress, and that didn't happen, and that's a disappointment. And again, if we had just won one more Senate, well, in this case, 2 more Senate seats on the other side, we would have been in control of the Senate, and it's all the more disappointing in that I believe that we're down by 1, maybe 2 Senate seats. We actually lost ground compared to 2020, where we at least tied the Senate, but the vice president, of course, was the tying vote, so they had a majority. And that's a disappointment. And but still, we do have the House, and that's a good thing moving forward. But you would like to see a scenario where you have both houses in opposition to the president, really to stifle his very far left-wing agenda, shall we say, to the point where it can be neutralized and nullified. And I think the House can do that to a point, but not without the Senate. So the Biden administration will keep trudging along with their edicts and with their executive orders and with their agendas. And we can slow it down, but we can't put it to a stop like we could have if we had control of both chambers.
Absolutely. I think this was a very, very closely watched election, unlike a lot of midterms, and I think both sides were disappointed. I would say divided government generally is a good thing because there are checks and balances. And if you look at the disaster that the last 2 years have been for the country, whether it be inflation or open borders or the energy policy, I thought there was going to be more backlash than there was. However, if you look at it on a state-by-state basis, there was a net gain of about 12 million votes that swung from 2020 to 2022 the Republican way. They just didn't swing in the right states. And I think part of that is because the Democrats are good at working the election. They were big advocates of early voting. They used the COVID pandemic beautifully to change the long-standing state election laws in a lot of swing states. And they also typically, because they're so unionized, they like having 6 weeks to work the voters. And the polls opened on September 21st in Pennsylvania. The first debate between the two candidates wasn't until the 25th of October. And you know, the Democrat candidate was outrageous. But half the people in Pennsylvania never saw him.
That's right.
Until the debate. Very much the same strategy that Joe Biden used in 2020 to hide in the basement.
Indeed.
So you take the combination of not debating, as was the case in Arizona, or only having one debate after the voting already begins, and then having all these operatives on the public payrolls. The deck is somewhat stacked against Republicans, but I look at it as an optimist and say, yes, we won the House. We have to learn from our mistakes as conservatives in this election and do a better job next round.
One of the things that came out that the Democrats are very good at now, they love having absentee ballots. They love having early voting. And the thing that they especially love is ballot harvesting. And ballot harvesting, to your point about the unions, worked effectively in Nevada, where Paul Laxalt was expected to win that state as a Republican senator. It was a given. However, in the last few weeks of the election, apparently, the union troops went around and did their ballot harvesting and went to the apartment complexes, went to the old age homes, gathered them all up, brought them in, and lo and behold, 3 out of 4 of those ballots tended to go for the Democrat. And bear in mind, this is not illegal. This is not something that's legal in Nevada. It's not legal here, but that's legal in Nevada. And if they do it, we have to do it. And we have to get good at it. We have to get expert at this to see what they're doing. And you also, in terms of winning elections, you also mentioned how the Democrats are also very good at, shall we say, manipulating election law to their point. We have to really be assertive and aggressive in doing that to our advantage, and quite frankly, I would say to maintain the fairness of elections. Now, as you recall, we all recall, in 2000, the Republicans, to their credit, brilliantly were able to win that election and use the courts legally and legitimately to their advantage, and be aggressive and proactive in winning that election. And it came down to the courts, through the courts. But somehow we lost our edge since then. And I think after that loss, the Democrats were so shocked that we beat them. We beat them at their game, that they were determined that it never happened again. And we've seen that it hasn't happened again. In other words, what tends to happen with Democrats is, if you have, what I've noticed and what others have noticed is, when you have an election that hasn't been called election night, and it tends to go on for a few days or a few weeks, it's now our new saying, the tie goes to the Democrats. Yeah. It's been shown that I believe it's 3 out of 4 elections that are called days or weeks after that time, go to the Democrats. Somehow they always come up with absentee ballots. Somehow they always find ballots. Somehow this ballot harvesting works to their advantage. And somehow they're able to open up the envelopes and voila, they've won the election, lo and behold.
Well, you know, there were other factors also. I think that some of the senatorial candidates were not the best because the Democrats interfered in the primaries. There were more moderate Republican candidates in some of these swing states that clearly had a better chance of carrying the independents. So what did the Democrats do? They donated huge amounts of money to the more extreme candidate that won the primary, only to lose in the general election. And you don't have to look any further than right up across the border in New Hampshire to see how that worked. Same thing in Pennsylvania. So I think we have a leadership problem in Mitch McConnell. I don't think he should have gotten involved in manipulating the primaries.
Oh, wait, let me just back up for a minute. So you were referring to the Republican leadership of the Senate and notable Republicans who are supporting, shall we say, or who are going against certain candidates in primaries?
Yes, the weaker candidate from a, across-the-board perspective. Yes. I don't think that's right. I think the state should determine their own fate, and the former Senate Minority Leader or current Senate Minority Leader should stay out of it.
Yes.
So that was unfortunate. I also think there's a lot of media bias. There are very few conservative media channels, and I don't think they do a particularly good job of reaching independent voters. I think both nationally and on a state level, the Republican brand is very damaged, specifically among young voters. I think it doesn't help to keep electing leaders that are 80 years old if you want to attract a younger base.
Exactly.
And again, that's part of the whole echo chamber. I mean, there were many good minority candidates, female candidates, younger candidates who did well. And we picked up, I think, some great new leaders like J.D. Vance and others. I think for the conservatives, this will be a net gain. But I also hope that we do our homework and learn from our mistakes.
Well, some of the bright spots has been, for example, Florida. Now, the Democrats had hoped to shift Florida into at least a purple state moving forward to the 2024 presidential election. And it was exactly the opposite. It was exactly the opposite. Florida has solidified as a die-hard Republican state. And it's very important, just in terms of, of their electoral votes, of the power that they bring to Republican politics. That was a state that we were in danger of losing. Texas also maintained its stature just in terms of House votes and House congressional votes. And so we didn't lose in Texas, and we gained in Florida, and that's an important thing. Now, the other problem that I'm seeing are the what's happening in California reverberates across the West. Now, what is happening in California? Well, the state is nearly bankrupt. Every social ill that one can think of, just in terms of crime, in terms of rampant homelessness, everything that you can possibly imagine is happening in California, which was the state that people used to go to, move to. Well, now there's an exodus from California. And where are these people going?
Arizona,
they've gone to Arizona and Nevada. And you know, Arizona was Barry Goldwater's Arizona. It was strictly a Republican state, not anymore. Nevada, the same thing. Nevada was a very red state, not anymore. And the other problem that is happening that people have to watch out for in the Republican world is now people are starting to move into Idaho and Montana. Where? From California. So you have this exodus from California of Democrats, of liberals, who are fed up with the state, with the high taxes, et cetera, which was largely of their own making. So now they're moving to these states.
But I think again, I see an opportunity in that because Republicans did much better this time with Hispanics.
Yes, yes.
I think there were more and more strong women candidates like
Yes.
Carrie Lake.
Yes.
I think we have to diversify our party to look more like America,
Yes, indeed.
and realize that the only old white guys are they're not the only conservatives.
That's
and,
right.
and that conservative government is good government. And I don't think
Well, they
we've done a
well,
good
they
job
have
of
to-
getting
they
that
have to
message out.
Republicans have to articulate that message, and that hasn't been done. But also, you know, if you look at our neighboring state, New Hampshire, which has really gone very blue, and you know, I remember in '16 we lost by almost a half a percentage point
Right.
in the presidential
Right.
election. Now in 2020 we lost by 6 points. I don't know what it was like today, but it was about the same. There is not aside from the governor, Sununu, there is not a Republican in either the Senate, U.S. Senate there, or the two congressmen that they have there. And of course, there was a very good candidate, the general, who ran up there, but who lost. And the same thing in Maine and in the other New England states. Now, just for a perspective as to what is happening in New England, we have one U.S. Senator who's a Republican, Susan Collins. We have no congressman,
Right.
not one, out of 25.
We got close with a couple, but
Out of 25 in 6 states. And this is a problem. Now, just shifting a bit to Massachusetts, were you surprised at the outcome of the statewide elections and of the secondary election, shall we say?
very much so.
Really?
Well, especially we had a Republican governor.
Yes.
And we have a history of divided government in this state. I don't think the candidate ran a very good race. I think there were plenty of disgruntled voters that we did not connect with at all. I think the election was handed to Maura Healey.
Well, you know, one of the things that really was evident in elections, and especially in this state, is that, or in any state, is that money talks. Now, I read somewhere where Charlie Baker won in 2014 by 55,000 votes against a very weak candidate, Martha Coakley, but he won with $10 to $11 million, and she had a lot of money too. Now, this particular time around, Maura Healey had, I believe, close to that amount,
Right.
and her opponent, Jeff Deere, barely hit $100,000, $200,000. Now, when you have that type of disparity,
Yeah.
you're not going to
It's
win.
not a fair fight.
It's not a fair fight. You're not going to win the election. But, you know, there was nothing unfair that Maura Healey did. She raised money. People donate money to her. But the Republican candidate couldn't do it, and the Republican Party couldn't do it in the state, with the result being that I don't think that no statewide Republican candidate from governor all the way down to state auditor won even 40% of the vote.
Right. No, it was
that's sad. That's pitiful.
Well, you had other factors too, like the Dobbs decision,
Yes.
poorly timed, and a lot of low information voters didn't really understand the reality of that decision, which was basically correcting overreach from
Yes.
50 years ago, and that it was going to
You're
basically
talking about the Dobbs abortion
yeah,
decision.
right.
Yes.
It was going to revert back to the states. There was no risk of abortion becoming illegal in Massachusetts under any circumstances, but again, some of the low information voters were probably motivated with a lot of assistance from the Democrat Party to get out and vote with them.
Without question.
You know, so I think that was another tipping point factor in some of these races. But I also think, Tom, fundamentally, it comes down to the candidates. It's the same reason that Charlie Baker won. People liked him, and he also represented Massachusetts in his politics. I think Lee Zeldin did an amazing job in New York, considering how lopsided the registration is there for Democrats. He almost beat Kathy Hochul. And he also, to his credit, probably elevated 4 or 5
That's right,
congressmen who
Yes.
would have been,
Yes,
those seats
indeed.
would have been red if it wasn't for Lee Zeldin's excellent messaging. And he was on message, and I think it really resonated with people. He's the kind of candidate we need to be looking
You're exact.
towards.
He was an effective candidate. He ran extremely well, and he came up short, but he did have good coattails, like you said. Now, the other problem that we've encountered is we have 9 congressional seats, none of which we won. We had 8 eight of those were contested. And what strikes me is, for example, Catherine Clark is or was Nancy Pelosi's deputy. She was number 4 in the Democrat congressional hierarchy. She is so far to the left. She's a horrible candidate, and she's a horrible legislator. However, she won by more than 2/3 of the vote against a very good candidate that we put up, Caroline Colarusso. And you know, you have to wonder, the people in these districts, what are they thinking when they go down and vote her in again and again and again? And she's not the most far left candidate. We had a candidate running, Jeffrey Sosa Paquette, who was running against McGovern, whose first name escapes me, Jim McGovern, in Worcester. And Worcester County is not liberal central, but again, he barely got 1/3 of the vote, and so on and so forth. We could go down the list in Massachusetts. We haven't had a Republican congressman in Massachusetts since the two Peters, Peter Torkelson and Peter Blute, back in the 90s. And despite the best efforts of the Republican Party to elect Republicans on a statewide level, in the past decade or more, we've had 2 Republicans who have been elected on a statewide level. They are, of course, Charlie Baker, who was elected twice, and Scott Brown, who was elected once. And both of those candidates were, shall we say, moderates. They were more in the Massachusetts tradition of producing moderates, which goes way back to the time of Elliot Richardson and before that, and Ed Brooke, and Frank Sargent, et cetera, et cetera. And you know, and it reminds me of the reality that I think that this trend started when Ray Shamey ran against John Kerry in '84. For those old folks who remember that. So Ray Shamey ran in the primary against Elliot Richardson, who was a typical Boston Brahmin Republican, the moderate version of the Northeast. Now, Ray Shamey was the ultra-conservative. Ray Shamey won the primary, but he lost in the finals. So you had, in this particular gubernatorial election, Republican primary, you had Jeff Deal, the very conservative candidate, against Chris Doughty, the more moderate Charlie Baker type of Republican. Now, in the Republican primary, Doughty didn't even come close, despite his money, despite his wealth, despite his resources. Jeff Deal won, who didn't have any money to speak of. So what we're seeing is that Republicans can certainly win, conservatives can certainly win in primaries. The problem with that is they get swamped in the finals. And we also saw that with Jeff Deal in 2018 against Elizabeth Warren. Again, he won the primary, but again, he was swamped.
Well,
this is the problem.
We have to smarten up.
Yes.
We have to, and I think a lot of the social conservatives in our party just will not understand you can't have perfection be the enemy of the good.
Yes.
You've got to have a broad, big tent, as they say, if you're going to win in Massachusetts. And I think, like I said before, we need leadership at the national level and the state level that's willing to sit down and say, let's get the whiteboard out, and how do we do it differently next time in order to win? And I mean, these guys have big egos. You know, they don't want to change. But when you're handed your hat the way we were in the Senate races, and also here in the Commonwealth, I hope our leadership steps up and does that. And we have to compel them to do that as voters and as local leaders.
You know, Mark, one of the problems is that right now, as of now, well, not as of now, but within 2 months, when Charlie Baker, the Republican governor, leaves office, we will have become a one-party state.
Right.
And this is not what people want. Polls have shown that this is not what the general public desires. But nevertheless, this is what we're having here. We will not have a single Republican on a statewide elected office anywhere in the state, including our congressional districts. And you know, at least even in California, they have some Republican congressmen.
And areas of the state
Illinois,
that are very red.
They have some Republican congressmen, so we're totally 100% blue. Even Vermont has a Republican governor.
Well, but again, I think it all starts at the local level. if we're not recruiting young people into the party, if we're not having messaging that says being a fiscal conservative is a good thing, having strong borders is a good thing.
Yes.
I think our messaging is dated, and I think we need to start at a local level. I know, you know, when we have our city committee meetings, the median age at those meetings is not encouraging in terms of
Certainly
the
not.
future.
However, I will say this. There is now a chair of the Newton Republican City Committee who is a 30-something
Right.
a doctor, and Dr. Jessica Shanahan, and I, shall we say, wisely turned the reins over to her after being in that position for a decade. But it was time to do that.
Right.
To just get the youth in, to get the young people in, and get the energy level up.
Well, hopefully 2022 will be a lesson to conservatives about how the tactics have to change for 2024 and beyond. I certainly hope so.
Certainly, and you know, moving forward to 2024, the presidential race will be a little complicated in that right now you have Donald Trump, who he actually surprised me that he did announce that he was running again, and then you have the governor of Florida, Rick DeSantis. So the question is, how is that going to work out? Are they going to work together? Are they going to run as a team? We don't know what's going to happen moving forward, but I will say this, that we have 2 years really to get our act together, and if we want to win the presidency, and if it's true that Joe Biden is running again, by then he will be extremely vulnerable. He has all the characteristics of a one-term president, i.e. Jimmy Carter, written all over him, and he is so beatable. He is so defeatable. We can do this, but we need to get the right candidate to run against him.
Well, the process is going to be bloody. Trump is a gladiator, but I think if anyone can turn the tide, based on Ron DeSantis' amazing performance in Florida, both as governor and with the hurricane, I think airing out the best route for the party over the course of the next year is a good thing, and I think the best person will win.
Certainly. I would also like to say that we lost on question 1, which is the quote so-called millionaire's tax. That also is a harbinger for the override override, which is coming in March, meaning those people who voted for that will vote for the override because they just love to tax us to death, and that's what will happen. So we'll leave on that note. Mark, I thank you for being with us tonight.
Great to see you, my friend.
It's so good to
Always
have you
a pleasure.
here. We'd love to have you back. And folks, happy Thanksgiving to all. Please, we'll be with you next month, and please tune in to Conservative Corner. Check your new TV listings, and tell your friends and neighbors, and we'd love to have you aboard next time. Thank you for joining us.